What's going on, everybody? All right, so it's been a week since I arrived at the National. My body is still recovering. Apparently, it takes me longer than it used to get my body back to normal after I absolutely torture it with no sleep, being on my feet, walking and eating complete garbage. Who'd have known? But here we are, and I still have these. I'm on this high right now from the National. Even though, again, I got home on Saturday, I feel as energized in the hobby as I have in a really long time, and that's awesome. And I am really enjoying looking at all the content of all the other people who made videos, and I'm still getting caught up, but I'm having fun doing it, and I'm trying not to rush it. I'm trying to take my time and enjoy it as videos continue to trickle in. Now on Friday, so in 2 days from now, I will be posting my kind of final thoughts, final wrap up from the National. I'm going to be showing some of the items that I was given from a variety of different people. But the part of it that I'm most excited to do and share is I'm going to tell in depth the story of how things played out and how I was able to acquire my T206 Ty Cobb red portrait and my portrait T206 portrait of Cy Young. So how did that all happen? Like in detail, the story of how it happened. So I'm excited to share a little bit more behind the scenes, a little bit more of my insights and thoughts after takeaways, I should say, after attending the epicenter of the hobby. So look for that on Friday. But today is not Friday, today is Wednesday. And Wednesday means it's Q&A day. I, again, as always, encourage you, if you have a question for an upcoming episode, down below in the comments, simply type out your question. Try to do it in the Wednesday videos because it's easier for me to kind of keep track of them. But excited to share my thoughts on some of these. Another group of great questions that I picked out from last week and a week or two before. So with that, let's take a look at our first question. Appreciate your thoughts as always, Greg, particularly with your somewhat loose definition of what you collect, i.e. pretty cards of players that you like. I do have a question. I think it has finally happened. The likely 100+ hours of videos I've watched across your channel and others have done their job. The bug has bit me. I want to explore a vintage side PC. What advice do you have for me considering my main PC, and thus the majority of my card budget, will remain modern Sacramento Kings? I've learned a lot in those 100 hours, but I feel like a drop in what feels like a vast ocean that is vintage. Thanks as always for what you do. There's no doubt that things can get overwhelming. When you start to wade into some waters that you're not super familiar with, you should wade in slowly. I would not recommend somebody take a big swan dive into a pond that they've never been in because you don't really know what's underneath the surface. What I recommend is that you, take your time. Imagine that. Now, we are in a hobby and we are a group of people who can't be patient. We're in a society. We're in an era of the world where there is no patience. And I understand that because at our fingertips, in our phones, we can access the answer to anything almost instantly. And so to be patient is difficult. But here's my thought. My thought is I would never recommend that anybody spend any money on something that they don't understand. It's the same reason I have no interest in putting any money into cryptocurrencies, because I don't think I get it. And if I don't get it and I don't really understand it, that's okay. I'm not interested in learning about it. It's not It's not a lane for me. So what I would recommend is the first thing you should do is find a category that you like. What is something appealing to you? Specifically, I would start with the decade. So if you're thinking about getting into vintage, I would say, okay, what do you like? Do you like the cars from the 70s? Do you like the 60s? Do you like the 50s? Do you like some of the pre-war stuff? Do you like turn of the century stuff? So I would first start with an era. And then within that era, what I would recommend that you do is I would recommend that you pick a set or a release of cards, a particular, some sort of variety that you can start to watch and you can start to track and you can start to monitor and you can start to read about and watch videos on. There are a lot of YouTube videos on specific sets. My buddy Dan over at Dan's Vintage Baseball PC, he commonly will have basically a whole episode with a guest who's a collector and an expert in that particular set. You could watch a video like that from one of the sets that you're interested in, learn about it, read about it, look through the checklist, look through the key cards, look for what they're selling for, and get a good idea of what it is. And then once you start to get comfortable with that, then you can start to purchase in that. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't just walk into waters that you're unfamiliar with and immediately start spending a lot of money. I would start slow. I would allow myself to make purchases. And when you enter into this new space, enter into an area or a way that is not going to be painful if you make a mistake. If you start with the 1952 top set and you say, I want to get all the Hall of Famers, and you start to make some mistakes, and you say, how could you make mistakes? Well, maybe what you do is you decide, I'm going to go for any card just based on the number, and you start buying cards that are way off center with angled cuts, which is common in that set. And then later you look back and you go, I wish I hadn't bought these ones that are way off center with an angle cut. But you were just wanting to check boxes. So I would start slowly. I would start very, very intentionally in a specific area. And a lot of you that are listening, or maybe haven't, maybe at this point people have fast forwarded, and that's okay. But a lot of us start to get into new categories. There are a lot of us that have been collecting in the 50s and 60s, and we say, I'm kind of thinking pre-war, but it kind of seems overwhelming. That was me. Several years ago, was it maybe 3 years ago, was when I finally, for the first time, started considering pre-war stuff. I was really a 50s collector. I was buying a lot of cards in the 50s. And, 58 All-Stars, love the 58 All-Stars. 56 Ted Williams. Stuff like that is what I was buying. And then a few years ago, I said, I think I want to try some pre-war stuff. What I did not do is start buying a bunch of everything. What I started was I picked a set. I said, what pre-war set is iconic to me, is memorable to me, is nostalgic for me? And I remember as a kid going to card shows and seeing the T206s out. And just like, even if they were commons, I just remember just being amazed at the look of them and the age of them. And I loved them. So I said, okay, I'm going to start there. Now, before I bought any, I started to learn about the backs. Okay, what are the common backs? So I did a lot of research. Okay, I found charts on the commonality of, a drum back versus a sovereign back or a polar bear back or a Piedmont back or a, old mill back. And what I did is I started looking and going, okay, let's understand what this means. And then I started looking at the Southern Leaguers, which is sort of an offshoot within the set that has different values. And then I started looking at the Hall of Fame checklist. And then I started looking at and the portraits versus the non-portraits. And before I bought any, I watched and I read and I looked and I started to learn about it. And then I went in fairly slowly. And I started the first 6 months, I bought a couple of T206s. Now, I bought an Elmer Flick, who's a Hall of Famer, who won a batting title, batted over 400. And I bought a Christy Mathewson, but it was the least expensive Christy Mathewson. It was the dark cap one. And so what I did was I kind of found a slow pace in. Now, I've been doing that now. I've probably started that maybe 3 years ago is when I started collecting some of the T206s. And it wasn't until last year at the National that I finally bought a card over $1,100. It's like I didn't want to go for any big cards until I really had a foundation of understanding. So whether you're a person getting into vintage, you're a person who's a golden era collector of the 50s and 60s and you want to go into pre-war, or in reverse, maybe you're a vintage collector and you're like, I kind of want to maybe start collecting a little bit of modern stuff. I would say pick a set or a year and really start to understand that. And then broaden it a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And the other thing I would do is ask questions to people who do know about it. I mean, it was only a year and a half ago, maybe, that I started to really start to show any interest in some of the ice cream cards, the Yinglings and the Harringtons, and that was like a different lane. And I just said, those people are over there, I'm here. And then I have a couple of friends who were buying ice cream cards. I started asking questions. And then it shows. I would talk to dealers and I would ask questions. And I started to learn more and more and more about that lane in pre-war. So I would say get a very specific thing that you like. Start to study it. Start to watch videos on it. Start to ask questions about it. Start to look at the checklists and the sale prices and see what things go for before you buy anything. And then when you do buy something, don't buy the most expensive card in the set. I would say take your time and ease your way in. That would be my advice. So just like I wouldn't do a cannonball in the middle of Lake Tahoe in February, I would wade in from the shore, because that's a little bit safer. And so I would be kind of safe if you're wading into waters that you're not particularly comfortable with yet. Greg, after this week, I have more questions. Which event do you think will have a bigger impact on the current hobby landscape? The recent autograph memorabilia scandal, or Peter leaving SGC, and the goals of Collectors Universe to relocate SGC to boutique status? Okay, so the autograph. Well, I guess I should back up. If you hadn't heard, or if it wasn't something on your radar, I don't know, what was it? 2-3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, something like that. Sometime in the last month, there was a big fake autograph ring that came out, and the FBI was sort of tracking this group, and one guy in particular, he ended up leaving a note before he had a self-harm incident, and admitted basically what he had been doing, and that he had gotten a bunch of autographs out into the market. Now, I didn't really look into that story that much because it's kind of out of my lane. And as far as my channel is concerned, I don't do a lot of news stuff. And that was kind of a news item. And not only was it a news item, but it was kind of a memorabilia news item. So it wasn't really something I read a lot about. So I'm probably a little bit ignorant about what all was included. My understanding is it was mostly modern athletes. It was like Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Judge. And so when I started hearing that that was mostly what was, it just didn't really apply to me. So I didn't look into it that much. Now, I feel like with a lot of what's happening in technology, with AI, with auto pen usage, it seems to me like now is probably the easiest time in a long time to do fake autos. But I'm not really a modern auto guy. I have some autos. Now, do I think that the autos are going, that this ring is going to change the autograph market a lot? It might change some of the modern autograph market, but I don't know how much it changes the vintage autograph market. I want to put, if I am in the shoes of PSA and there's a big autograph that gets submitted, Jackie Robinson, Roberto Clemente, Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth. If I'm PSA, and I have to believe they think this, they're getting paid whether it gets a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If it gets authenticated, they get paid. If it doesn't get authenticated, they get paid. So there's no motivation for them to say that's real unless they are like certain that it's real. If they are certain that it's real, they'll give it a green light. But if it's not certain, I have to believe they just say, sorry, we're not sure. And they still get paid. I don't really think personally that market is going to change a ton as a result of this. But I could be wrong. Now, SGC versus PSA, that I think could have some ramifications. Now, I'm trying really hard. I did a video on this the other day. I guess was it Monday? On Monday, I did a video on SGC and PSA and Peter stepping down and what do I think. And I shared a lot of my thoughts on this already, so I'm not really going to go into it too much. I think Peter Steinberg, I believe that leadership has a huge effect on the staff. As an employee, when I've had leaders that I believe in and that gets me excited about their goal and their vision, I think I'm probably a better, more productive person. And I think that when there are leaders that I'm just like, come on, I have a feeling that I'm probably not as productive. Now, I don't want to be that way, but I think that's kind of human nature. And I think Peter had a major ripple effect in that company. And him leaving is not going to be good. PSA is now steering the ship, a ship that Peter used to steer. And Peter did a great job. I don't know what's going to happen. I will continue to say this. A lot of you guys, my eyes are really itchy. I don't know if it's the weather change or something. I keep itching my eyes. They're really itchy. Not that you guys care. I think that PSA is now running the ship and installing new systems and procedures and trainings and expectations. And I have to believe that will affect some things. But I want to reiterate, I really don't want SGC to go anywhere. And SGC has a ton of very loyal customers. And I hope that PSA is afraid of losing those customers. I just don't know if they are. So as I know that whenever I talk about these topics, people get frustrated. And none of us know what's going to happen. We just don't. But what I do know is PSA bought SGC and spent millions and millions of dollars on SGC. because they felt it was in their best interest. They don't go acquire SGC just because they're like, well, let's, add another label to the company. They did it because they felt like they needed to do it, and it was going to be in their long-term best interest. With that in mind, I have concerns. I absolutely have concerns. But let me again say this as well. I just submitted an order to SGC at the National. I submitted a 12-card order, and I have about another 15 at home that I'm thinking about doing an order on. Probably, but I'll talk more about that with one of the other upcoming questions. So I haven't answered the question, but I think that grading is a major part of the hobby at this point. For better or worse, like it or don't, it's here to stay. And I think it really affects the hobby. And this is not a new thing. It really affected the hobby back in the early 90s. In 1991, when PSA showed up, and all of a sudden, because remember, up until that point, you'd look in price guides and there were two columns. It was near mint to mint, and it was like very good. What PSA did when they started their grading company is they took things from 2 columns to 10. And then we introduced half grades. So now there are really like 20 columns. And what happened when they did that, I mean, a lot of people weren't in the hobby at this time. I was in the hobby at the time. And what happened was the Beckett law, it basically became irrelevant with vintage cards because there were 10 different grades. And Beckett had 2. So a 10 sold for way more than the near mint to mint. A 9 sold for way more than the near mint to mint. That is when market reports and auction ending prices, that's when eBay became one of the go-to price guides, because especially auctions. It changed the market. So this is not a new thing that grading has changed the market as far as valuations. That has been going on for 35 years. This is not new. What's new is the number 2 company, and they've been number 2 or at least in the top 3 for 30 years, SGC. It's kind of on life support. And nobody wants them to stick around more than me. But if they don't stick around, I think we should be prepared. I think that we should be prepared just in case. So I'm thinking about these things. Even though nothing has happened, that would be a direct signal of an inevitable. 2 possible questions for review. Number 1, a while back you said something about you had a group of cards you were considering to submit for grading, I think to SGC. I know you're probably making the National your priority, but why haven't you graded these cards? Because I have a group I think about grading every day, and I ask myself why I haven't. The best answer to me is A, I just don't want to give PSA any of my money and that process. B, I am more of an SGC guy, and they have dropped down in the excitement to me somehow. C, I could spend grading fees on some other cards. And D, the post office seems, let's just say, not what it used to be. Number 2, I ran into and had a conversation with a dealer recently. There was a grading company, I think in Texas, called MPE Grading. The dealer had several MPE graded cards that looked really nice to me. if our people are so disappointed with PSA and there are upcharges, slowness, and moving the goalposts, and seems like SGC is kind of watered down somewhat, I don't have a concrete data on CGC and Beckett, so we keep doing the same thing, hoping for better results, and the same thing keeps happening. Why don't we give some other grading companies a chance for our business, like MPE Grading? I am thinking on sending a few cards to them and see how it goes. Thank you. All right, so first thing I'll say is the first part of the question, the first question I should say. The first question was, why haven't you submitted your cards to SGC? You said you've been planning on submitting some cards to SGC. You kind of answered the question. You kind of nailed it. I don't want to spend my card money on putting my cards into plastic. I want to spend my card money on cards. So what I've been doing for the last 6 months, from January until April, I was trying to save every penny I could so I had a decent amount of money for Strongsville. And then as soon as I got home from Strongsville, I was trying to save every bit of money that I could for the National. And I wanted to spend those card dollars on cards, not on plastic. I then, from now until April, I don't have any big show to attend. That is when I usually would do things like send cards in for grading. Because this is the time of the year where I will go stretches without a big buying opportunity. So that's a big part of the reason. The other part of the reason is there are a lot of cards that continue to go back and forth. I go, do I really need this graded? Like, this is like a $70 card, and I'm going to spend $15 to get it graded, plus I got to ship it. Why? So I keep going back and forth on, do I even need to get it graded? Because I've said before, to me, there's 3 reasons to grade. Reason number 1, I think that cards do personally look pretty good in holders, especially pre-war cards and SGC holders. I think they look good. I think it's a nice presentation. Number 2 reason that I think that you get cards graded is just to have another opinion of authenticity. With all the cards in question that I've been thinking about grading, I'm like certain that they're real cards. So that's not really an issue. And then the third piece, the third thing is so that when my loved ones eventually end up with my cards, it will be easier to liquidate them, and it'll be easier for them to know their true value if they're graded. Those, for me, those are the 3 reasons to grade cards. Well, I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. I'm still fairly young, and if you're going to get it authenticated to see if it's authentic, that doesn't really apply. So, to be honest with you, most of the cards that I have that I'll get graded is because I think they look good in SGC holders. And right now, it has been more important for me to save up than it has been for me to make my existing cards look a little cooler. So that's the reason I haven't done it. That said, toward the end of the National, when I saw I wasn't going to make another big purchase, I said, okay, I've spent pretty much all of my money. I'll go spend a few bucks to get some cards graded. I got 12 cards graded. I paying for everything. It was like $200 on the nose. So that's where that is. Now, as far as another alternative grading company, I'm a very cautious person. I am a very, you might call me boring. I'm not the first guy to buy the new brand item. I'm not the guy who's going to go get a Tesla the day Teslas come out. I tend to kind of sit back and go, let's see how this plays out. I'm not a person that would have bought a hybrid, the first hybrids that came out. I'm a person who sits back and says, let's see how this goes. Let's see if there are issues. Let's see the pros and cons. And then I'm a later adopter. If I want a card, if the three reasons that I just said I would get a card graded are it looks better, it ensures authentication, and it makes it easier to liquidate. Well, as things stand at this moment, if I don't know of a grading company, I don't really know if they know what they're doing. So regardless of this small startup grading company, I don't know if they know whether a card's authentic or not. So I would wait to find out what the feedback is from other people. As far as the liquidation, it's harder to liquidate a card in a holder of a grading company that nobody's ever heard of than it is to liquidate a card that is in a PSA, SGC, or maybe CGC holder, Beckett holder. It would be much harder to sell those cards. If you had the same card in a case and there were 4 in a row, and one was PSA, one was SGC, one was Beckett, and one was Joe's Grading, I don't think anybody would choose the Joe's Grading slab. So that would mean it would be lower demand, harder to liquidate for the same amount of money. So I'm not really feeling that. And then to be honest, the last piece is I think cards look nice. Now, some of these other slabs do look nice, but I am neurotic. I'm neurotic. The fact that I have a couple of different holders drives me crazy. That I have SGC and I have PSA holders, it drives me nuts. Adding more into the mix seems like more than I could handle. So for me, I'm not an early adopter. I applaud those of you that are, but it just doesn't make sense for me to choose a grading company that I've never heard of, because all it does is it makes my slabs more mismatched. I'm not 100% confident that it's authentic because I don't know their reputation yet, and it's not easier to liquidate. So it doesn't really accomplish much for me. That doesn't mean others should do that and others should do what I do. I don't ever think that you should do what I do. I'm just explaining to you my reasoning for what I do. I hope I gave a decent answer on that one for you. Question: what is a transaction that fell through or a card that got away that still bothers you? So I've been asked this question a couple of times, and at that point when I had been asked it before, I didn't really have that great of an answer. I didn't have 1 or 2 incidents that I could point to. But like at this last national, just last week, there were a few times where there were cards that I saw and I went back for later and they were gone. Now, things still worked out for me. I'm really happy with how things worked out. But there are a couple of times, where something didn't work out. And now I look back and go, I just can't believe it. So I will go through the 2 that stick out the most. At the 2024 Strongsville show, Ash sent me his inventory pictures. And I did a video on the inventory pictures. You can go back and watch it. It would have been like early April or probably early April of 2024. And I'm going through his inventory pictures and this card just absolutely jumps off the screen to me. It had amazing color, amazing centering. It just was gorgeous. And it was a 1949 Bowman Larry Doby rookie card. And I looked at it and it was in a 5. It was an SGC 5. And I looked at it, I'm like, and even in the video, I'm like, man, that card is gorgeous. It is stunning. And so I go to the show, and the first cases I looked at that show were Ash's. And that card jumped off the case. I'm like, Oh my gosh. At that point, the most I had ever spent on a card was $1,100. It was on my Christy Mathewson. And the Dobie, I think he was asking either $1,300 or $1,350. And I was like, I like Larry Dobie. But am I about to spend more on a Larry Dobie card than on any card I've ever bought in my entire life? And at that show, I think I had probably about $2,500 with me. And I called my dad after the first night, and I said, Dad, what do you think? I was like, this card is sweet. And I even featured it in my first day video at Strongsville. And I remember exactly in the case where it was. And my dad goes, that's a lot of money for a Larry Dobie card. I mean, Larry Dobie's great, but like, it's not like you're this lifelong Larry Dobie guy. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. So at the beginning of the second day, I go in there early in the show. I bought a 33 Gowdy Rogers Hornsby, and I bought a 49 Bowman, 49 leaf Warren Spahn, and a T206 Rube Marquard portrait card. And I had about $1,400 left. And so I must have had about $3,000 with me, because I had about $1,400 left. And I go, I think I might go buy that Dobie. And I went over to Ash's table, and he had two of them, but one of them was stunning. The other one was nice, and it was gone. And I remember just feeling crushed. And I had a great show. I mean, I got some great cards. I'm thrilled with what I came home with in that show. But I was bummed out. That card right now is like double the price. So to get that card now, it would be at least $2,500. And it's just, that's 15 months later, it doubled. And so that one haunts me a little bit. The other one would be at this year's Strongsville show. There was a dealer, and I'm blanking on his name. I always blank on this. Steve Wilk. I was at Steve Wilk's booth, and he had a gorgeous 1954 Topps Jackie Robinson in an SGC 5. Maybe it was a PSA. Can't remember which holder. It was in a 5, and he wanted $1,000 for it. And I was still working on trying to get a big card. I hadn't bought my Christy Mathewson yet. I was thinking about trying to pull a Cobb or a Cy Young or a Walter Johnson. And I was just kind of hemming and hawing. And then I bought my Christy Mathewson, and I had like $1,500 left, something like that. And I go, I'm going to go get that Jackie now. I went over there. It was gone. And it was gorgeous. It was a 5 that looked like it looked like a 10. So those two haunt me a little bit. But you know what? I've had a pretty good year. I've gotten a Ty Cobb red portrait, a Cy Young portrait, Christy Mathewson portrait, Sandy Koufax rookie card in a 4.5 that looks like a 6. I've had a really good year, so it's kind of hard for me to hang my head about a couple of deals that didn't happen, because the deals that did happen were pretty good deals. So it happens to all of us, I guess. I love hearing your opinions on Q&A Day, even when I don't always agree with your opinions. I have a new question for next week. I am older than you and have had a massive collection of cards that number in the tens of thousands. When you get to the tender age of being well past midlife, would you consider downsizing your collection to make it easier for your loved ones to sell the remaining assets? Is the fact that your heirs have no interest in your hobby have any bearing on your decision? Would you look for a trusted relative or friend to make sure that those cards are properly valued and sold? I am in the age group, and I have found it difficult to part with so many well-loved cards. But I also know that I would eventually put my children in a brutal position of disposing of so much volume. I also don't have anyone I could trust to dispose of these assets. I would love to hear your thoughts. I think this is a question that a lot of us think about. And I think the older we get, the more we think about it, is what's going to happen to our stuff once we're gone. If we're not thinking about that, I almost feel like we're leaving a burden to people that we love. We're leaving a burden to our heirs. And I for sure do not want that. My daughters have no interest in cards. My wife has no interest in cards. So I definitely have thought about this. Now, the other day I went to the bank. I was in town with my daughter Molly, and we went to the bank, and I pulled out some money for the National. And she's like, "You're taking that much money to the National?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she said, What do you expect us to do with your cards someday?" I think it was one of the first times that she realized the amount of funds that are spent by me on cards. And I said, "Well, I don't expect you to keep them." And she said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, she seemed relieved. She's like, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" And I go, "Well, I don't expect you to have a box full of cards that are worth money for the rest of your life just because they were mine and you feel like you can't sell them. What I want you to do is I want you to sell them for as much money as possible." Now, I have been a fairly narrow collector for most of my life. I mean, a lot of my friends talk about how they have tens of thousands of cards. I don't. I mean, slabbed cards, I probably have 250. I expect that number to go down. I can't imagine that in 10 years I'll have more than 100 cards. Now, that doesn't mean I'm just going to sell off cards for the sake of selling off cards. What I will do is I get great satisfaction when there's a card that I thought was unattainable, like a Ty Cobb Red Portrait T206. And then I attain it. That is such a great feeling. And there are times that we have cards that we hang on to for a long time, and then over time, we just go, "That was great to have, but it doesn't excite me anymore." And when it doesn't excite me anymore, then I say, maybe it's time to move this on to someone else who will get excited by it, and I'll put those funds towards another card that does excite me. I see myself having 30 to 40 cards when I die, which is a very, very manageable number. I also will have names and numbers and things of friends that they can reach out to for help. I've had multiple strangers reach out to me and say, "Hey, I don't know what my cards are worth," or "If I die, I don't know what my wife's going to do because everything's raw." I've said this many times. I mean, I'm a teacher. I think at this point, I've proven myself to be a pretty decent stand-up, honorable guy. Anybody listening to this is welcome to leave my email address taped to the box of where you have all your cards. And if your loved one needs somebody to send pictures to, they need somebody to run, thoughts by or get advice from, I'm going to be happy to help them. And I'm not going to do what the local card shop dealer is going to do. I'm going to actually try to help them make a good decision. Now, if you have a friend in the hobby, I would leave that information. If you have somebody local that you trust, I would leave that information. But if you don't have a person like that, you can choose me, or if you don't trust me and there's somebody else in the hobby that you do trust, leave that person's contact information so there's at least a point of contact for your loved one. Because it can be daunting. When my mom's parents passed away and she goes over to their house, they've just got so much stuff everywhere. It's like, where do I even begin? I don't want to leave work for my heirs. I don't want my kids to have 3 months of work to liquidate my assets. I want it to be a very easy process for them. And I anticipate me continuing to narrow. And I continue to see, I have a friend who's a dealer who this past weekend, not at the National, somewhere else, had a really nice pre-war collection walk up to him with some really high-end stuff. And I was thinking, man, a couple of those I'd be interested in. But I don't have any money in my bank account right now. I dropped all of it at the National. And I started thinking, which of my cards is expendable? Which of my cards could I part with to get a couple of those cards? Because a couple of them are things that I'd really like to have. And I see me continuing to do that. Now, there will be times where my collection expands a little, and then it contracts a little, and expands a little, and contracts a little. And that is, I think, natural. But I think overall, it will be narrowing over time. It will continue to get more and more and more narrow. While it might get wider for a minute, it will then narrow not long after. That's what I anticipate. So yes, I absolutely think about it. Yes, I absolutely will have contact information for my family to reach out to get assistance and help on this. Yes, it will absolutely be specific people that I trust that I will be leaving their contact information for. And I certainly understand why somebody would be thinking about that, because I've been thinking about it. And yeah, I'm not going to die with 10,000 cards. I can tell you that. I anticipate dying with 30. And right now, again, if I were to guess, I'd say I have about 250 slabbed cards. So that's going to continue to narrow. If you guys have a question for an upcoming episode, do not hesitate to ask it in the comments below. I look forward to hearing those. Friday, my full review, my full storytelling mode, my full takeaways from the 2025 National.